Good evening. This is Pastor Barbara, aka Preacher with Parrots. With me are Chucky Bird and Chile Verde. They've been making a lot of noise. I hope they quiet down a little. I have them with me tonight for a particular reason, which will become obvious a little bit later. The big one is a blue-fronted Amazon named Chucky Bird, and the little one is a blinded in one eye, Nandy Conyard, who is somewhere in his 30s, maybe even his 40s. Did I say this is Pastor Barbara, aka Preacher with Parrots? Today is the 8th of February 2015. This is our second program for today. On Sunday nights, we are in the New Testament. On Wednesday nights, we are in the Old Testament, and on Sunday mornings, we are doing whatever the Lord leads us to do. This morning, and the video for this morning's program is already up. This morning's program was on the Exodus and Holy Communion. Next Sunday morning, I'm not looking at a map. I don't know if I can bring one up. Let me see real quick if I can do. Yeah, next Sunday will be the 15th. So on the 15th in the morning, we will be having Holy Communion. If you watch the video, it will tell you what to bring with you and how to have it prepared so that you can take part in Holy Communion. And I may explain it at the end of this video. Well, you've got a whole week to get ready. We are in the book of Romans, which was written by the Apostle Paul to the church in Rome while he was still in Corinth. Paul had never been to Rome. Paul writes very clearly, very strictly, and sometimes you could say a bit hard to a church that he didn't know. He was the founder, the evangelist that started many of the churches in the New Testament. And the members of those churches were like his spiritual children. And he could kind of correct them when they needed it, and he felt it was his place as their spiritual father. However, he writes quite clearly and does not mince any words telling them what they're doing wrong. And he's writing to people he has not met. In addition, they have some problems. They have not only the problems that he's trying to correct, they have other problems that are not of their own making. Jews had been originally taken to Rome as slaves. The governor of Rome did not want them there and threw out all the Jews. Now, at this time in Bible history, we have two kinds of Christians. I need to check something. Just a moment. Okay. I got a message, and the reason that I took the message, this is a prayer request for a person working in the electronic field, had insulation that fell on him, got in his eyes. And the reason I took the message when I saw my cell phone flashing is because my operators, at the same time I'm making this video, I'm doing a live program. And if anything goes wrong and they can't communicate with me, if they're typing and nothing is coming out, that's the only way they have of letting me know there's a problem. So that's the reason I took it. So I'm sorry for the interruption. And we will pray later for this man. He is a former pastor also. Paul writes to them. Now, there were two kinds of Christians. It hadn't been very many years since Jesus died, was resurrected, and ascended into heaven. The Holy Spirit fell upon the disciples and other believers in the upper room, and the church was born. God's people up to that time had been Jews. Hi, Larry. Welcome to you. Glad you made it tonight. So the Jews, many of them knew him after he was resurrected. Guys, I don't need the competition. They had more knowledge than the Gentiles did. They had prophecies about Jesus would be born and what he would do. They had the laws of the Old Testament, which weren't changed too much in the New Testament. So the Jewish believers understood the Bible and doctrine and Jesus' teaching very well. It was after Jesus' death and resurrection that the Apostle Paul, on his way to Damascus, Syria, a city which still exists, and it's the best city, I guess, in Syria to shop, according to my lady friends. When the Lord appeared unto him, he was converted. The Lord took him out for 3 years into the desert. He had many visions and many revelations there. And all of the doctrine and all of the knowledge that we have in most of the New Testament is given to us through him and the revelations that God gave him. Now, he had a lot of information to share. He was sharing mainly with Gentiles, which people who knew nothing of Christianity. The Jews had a background in the Old Testament. So while Christianity was new to them, it was nothing like how new it was to the Gentiles. So here we have a church in Rome, a church with some problems, a church without a pastor, a church that doesn't even have any Jewish Christians there because the governor decided to kick them out of Rome. So they really have nobody to help them understand some of these things. Well, he writes to them, tells them he's wanted to visit them for a long time, and he's hoping he can do that. He talks to them, actually, the first 15 verses. He explains that he is an apostle and that he wants to come and visit them and that he prays for them and he hopes they will pray for him. In verse 16 of the first chapter, he says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation, to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek." Greek was the next country from Rome, Italy. They were also Gentiles. Anybody who wasn't a Jew was a Gentile. They could also be a Greek or an Egyptian or a Syrian, anything other than a Jew. They were Gentiles. In this case, they were Gentiles. They also happened to be Greeks. The book of Romans is a marvelously written book. It is a book which takes a subject that's very difficult to understand. How God could love somebody so much, but because they had a sinful nature, and because it was easier for them to sin than not to sin, and because they got this nature through the temptation and sin of Adam and Eve, God arranged that His own Son would take on a human form, live some 30 plus years without sinning. And because His life was without sin, He could die for sin, and His death would forgive the sins of those of us who did sin. Now, had He been a sinner, His death would have paid for His own sins. But since He wasn't, His death paid for ours. He's just come up with a marvelous verse here. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Gospel means good news. Because it's the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believes, to the Jews and the Greeks. Now, the Romans just kicked the Jews out. We're for either one. Well, I see that one of the birds just went upstairs a little bit. A little bit so that you can see them. Okay, there they go. I'll do that for the camera for our live show that we have too, as we're doing a live show at the same time. All right. I noticed something that I hadn't noticed on other times I've taught this same portion of Scripture. I thought Paul was being pretty rough on these people by jumping in and being very tough, not even knowing them, never having written to them before, knowing that they were without a pastor, that they were without people that knew how to share the gospel with them. And right away, he's talking to them about homosexual sin. And he's calling it an abomination and telling them they're worthy of death. And I'm thinking, this is pretty harsh for a group of people already in a delicate situation, and for someone that wants to help them, and for somebody that doesn't know them. And so I go to the history books, and I wanted to see what was life like in Rome in the first century. What could have been going on that caused him to react in a very aggressive language the way he did? Let me read his words. He starts out, I'm going to go to verse 17. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known by God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. He's getting ready to tell them, You people have two major sins. And both of them have to do with something that isn't natural. And you should be smart enough. Hey, you should be smart enough to be able to look around you and see that all of this had to be created. You look at the sky, you look at the trees, you look at animals, you look at yourself, you look at the world. Aren't you bright enough to realize it took a creator to do this? And if it took a creator to do this, wouldn't the natural thing be to serve that creator? And instead of serving that creator, what are you doing? You made a bunch of idols, and you're serving all these idols. That's his first complaint with them. His second complaint also has to do with what he considers natural. But let me get on with the first part. For the invisible things of him from creation are clearly seen, being understood, things that are made even by his eternal power and Godhead, so that they're without excuse. You have no reason not to believe that a creator made all this. Verse 21, because that, when they knew God, they glorify him not as God. Neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. You should have recognized him as God, and you didn't. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Now the Greeks were those who possessed wisdom. The Romans were better known for their viaducts, their chariots, their army, their military strength. The Greeks were more known for their athletics, for their poetry, for their science. So you have no excuse for not respecting God. I see we're being featured. Professing yourselves to be wise, you became fools. You guys act like you know so much, and you don't. Or you don't act like somebody who knows a lot. Verse 23. And changed the glory of the incorruptible God to an image made in the face of a man. He's getting ready now to describe some of the idols that they made. To birds, four-footed beasts, creeping things. Wherefore God gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own body between themselves. He has already told them now. They should have been smart enough to catch on that there was a creator, and instead they're acting like they're so smart, but they're worshiping something they made. You know that a creator is greater than his creation. If I, with my hands, make a clay vase or create something, the creator has to be smarter than the creation. The creation wouldn't even exist without the creator. Now he says, not only are you doing that, you're doing something else that's not natural. I think he's being a little harsher. He said, you changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image. Verse 24. God also gave them up to the uncleanness through the lusts of their own heart. To dishonor their own body between themselves. He's talking about two people that have unclean lusts. I see we have guest whose number ends in 07. Welcome. I have the guest chat turned off for a little bit. You'll be able to chat a little bit later because I'm also doing a video at this moment for YouTube also. So he said, God gave you up to the uncleanness of your own lusts, to dishonor your own bodies between yourselves. Verse 25, he says, in doing this, you changed the truth of God into a lie. So you put a creature instead of the Creator. You have decided that you have something different than what God created. And that involves lust, and that's what you're doing. In verse 26, he gets a little bit closer to home and starts explaining what he's talking about. For this cause, the fact that they're not honoring the Creator and doing what the Creator considers natural, he says, for this cause, God gave them up to vile affections, that even their women did change the natural use of that which is against nature. 2 videos were made in preparation for this video. The subject of homosexuality is a very sensitive. I brought these birds up here for a reason, but I didn't expect them to be making this much noise, and they're up a little higher than I want. Let me see if I can't bring them down so I can't fix this picture. I don't know if I may have to get up and get a stick to do it, but I think it's worth the time that I take to do it, because I can't get a decent picture with them way up there. So the little one, okay. I maybe say I brought them up here. I brought them up here for a reason. They are cage mates. I made these 2 videos because this is a sensitive subject. The first video, it's called All You Need to Know About Homosexuality, explains the difference between what it is to be a homosexual and what is the homosexual sin that Paul is talking against in this particular part of Scripture. A homosexual is a person who has a preference for being with someone of the same gender as opposed to being with somebody of the opposite gender. What this chapter 1 of the first chapter of the book of Romans is explaining about is sexual relations among the same gender. And many people mistakenly believe that people who are homosexual are engaged in this activity, and that's not the case. And because it's not the case, and because there's so many hard feelings and so much misunderstanding going around, I wanted to prepare us for hearing this message, because I realize it's hard. It's tough language. Listen, it's not easy for me to say, not because it embarrasses me, but because I don't want to hurt anybody, and I don't want to be misunderstood, and I do not want to be misquoted. So I've done everything I possibly can so that when I say someone is a homosexual, you don't immediately say, oh, they want to get married. Because that's not necessarily true. It may be for some, but not true for everybody. If I say somebody says they are homosexual, you understand when I say that I'm saying that this is a person who has a preference. Now, in that video, I explain, for example, that the Catholic Church ordains priests who are gay. Because to be gay or to be a homosexual, a male has a preference to be with another male. However, in the Catholic Church, priests take a vow of celibacy. They will not be with men or women. So what their preference is makes no difference. You see the difference between being homosexual and doing something which many homosexuals do. In that first tape, I also explained that there are heterosexuals who do homosexual sins. Let me read exactly what this homosexual sin is supposed to be. It says, women change the natural use to that which is against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, wanting, desiring another man, working in which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense in the error which was met. I specifically wanted to read the language that is here. In some of the modern versions, they use the terminology men sleeping with men. I'm a preacher. That means I teach what is written in the Bible. I have a preacher's education. I have a preacher's license and credential, and I have had for many years. I brought something to show you. The highest level that a person can reach in any Christian church is ordination. And I was given this. I don't know if you can see in the bottom of it. It says 50 down at the bottom. Let me put that in the other calendar also. Anyway, that 50 means that 50 years ago from the day they gave this to me, 50 years from the day they gave this to me, I was ordained. And I've had this for 8 years. I've been in the ministry for 61. I'm qualified to explain the Bible. No question about that. I'm also an educator. I have 2 university degrees in education. In the 30s and 40s, I went to school. In the 50s, I was an evangelist. And in the 60s and 70s, I taught public school. And in the 80s and the 90s, I worked in our court system in California. So I should be qualified to teach. I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to do it as fairly and as accurately as I can. To say somebody slept with somebody is not a good choice of words. That doesn't explain what they're trying to say. In my bedroom at night, the Chihuahua sleeps on the pillow on the other side of the bed from the side of the bed I sleep on. And the Jack Russell sleeps right smack in the middle of the bed. So you could say we sleep together. So see, I don't think saying that the Bible says men were sleeping with men, I don't think that's concise enough to talk about what we're talking about. Paul is not talking about men sleeping in the same bed. The language he uses is men lying with men as men lie with a woman. That's very clear language. I don't think anybody that knows the English language doesn't understand what that means. And that's why I'm being concise, because this business of homosexuality and many other subjects also are subjects that lend themselves to a lot of misunderstanding. And if I'm going to teach something, I want to do a good job of it. I want to tell you what the Bible or whatever book I'm teaching out of, what it really says and what it means. He says to them, they did not like to retain God in their knowledge. Again, he was talking about what was natural, the way he was talking earlier about God creating things, and naturally they should have figured out that it was a creator and then not be serving images. Now he said, now the women are leaving what is the natural thing is to be with men, and they're being with other women. And men are doing the same thing. They did not retain God in their knowledge. And because they did something which was so against what God taught, and by the way, in tape number 2, I read from the 20th chapter and the 18th chapter of Leviticus the exact same language. Men lying with men as men lie with women. The exact same language. So this is not something that's in the Old Testament that we can say, well, we live in the New Testament, we're under a new covenant, it has nothing to do with us. No, because the exact same language is in the New Testament, given there was a great deal of violence connected with the homosexual lifestyle in the Old Testament. In Sodom and Gomorrah, these men would have torn the building down if the angels hadn't blinded them. In the case which is in that same tape, the name of it, you can go to youtube.com and type in all you wanted to know about homosexuality number 2 and get that video. And it explains how this man was they were wanting to gang rape him. And instead, his wife was put out, they gang raped her, killed her. There was a lot of violence involved with this in the Old Testament that we don't see as much in the New Testament, and I don't see it among the people with whom I have association, the gays that I know, the people that I know. I don't see. Now, I do see some violence, more in attitude than I do in actual physical violence. But this is what he's talking about. And he said, it clearly says, that because of the way the people are acting, he has given themselves over to their own sin. Look, you know better. You've been told. You're doing it anyway. What's God supposed to do? Kill you? No. He's just going to let you do it. You know mothers and fathers who've tried to raise children, and there's some children you just can't raise them to do the right thing. And somebody's different. My former co-worker, Sister Rose, had a brother that was so hard to raise, and the father had died, and she raised the kids on her own. She took him to the army and lied about his age to get him out of the house because she couldn't handle it. I don't know what to do with you. Just give it up. I can't handle it anymore. And God took this attitude. You know better. This is what you want to do. You insist on doing it. I'm letting you do it. Let me go back and comment on some of this. Let me say, God is not talking against men or women who have a preference for the same gender. Having a preference is like being tempted. I'd like to do this. I'd sure like to do something that's wrong, but I'd like to do it. I'm having trouble with these birds again. I'm going to try to... Okay. So God gave them up and said, if this is what you're going to do, do it. Now, I want to talk about, where do homosexuals stand now? God said don't do this. It doesn't please God. What's going to happen? What are their choices? What should be our attitudes toward them? When I researched what life was like in those days in Rome, it was bad. It was not violent as the Old Testament encounters among homosexuals was, where they gang raped, killed, destroyed, that type of thing. But they were so, I'm looking for the right word. They were so nasty that their literature, the things that their writers wrote, the pictures that their artists painted, the stories that they made up could not be translated into the English language. This happened 1st century after Christ. We are in the 21st century. They lived in the 1st century. This was 2,000 years ago. It was 1900 years ago, before the English language contained the words which accurately translated what they were writing and doing in those days. The words did not exist in the English language until 50, 60 years ago to have it translated. I read some of it. It's pretty trashy, pretty bad. What should be our attitude toward homosexuals? What should be our attitude toward men sleeping with men the way men sleep with women? God said, as far as men lying with men, it's a sin. Don't do it. It is so bad, and you insist on doing it. I'm not going to fight with you about it. I'm going to leave you alone. But it can't be. You're not going to go to heaven if you continue to do this. So what should our attitude be toward homosexuals? A homosexual isn't a sinner because he's a homosexual any more than you're a sinner because you're sometimes tempted to do stuff you shouldn't do. You're not a sinner until you do it. In the 20th chapter, well, in the 18th chapter of Leviticus, we have a whole list of people that men were not supposed to sleep with. They weren't supposed to be with their mothers, their grandmothers, with their daughters, with their wives' sisters. There's a whole list of people. that they were not supposed to have sex with. There are people now that Christians, those following Christ and his teachings, are not supposed to have sex with. The attitude of some gay people is, well, I was made this way, I can't help it. Let's go down that list of people you're not supposed to have sex with. Let's say a man's wife has been injured in an automobile accident. And he says, I have needs. I'm heterosexual. I want to be with a woman. My wife is not available. Therefore, because I've been made this way, I'm a man who wants a woman. I can't help that. God made me that way. Therefore, the neighbor's wife is out mowing the lawn in a bikini. I'll go over there. Your situation doesn't allow you to do something that you shouldn't do because your wife is unavailable. In the Old Testament, a man couldn't sleep with his daughter just because his wife died. There are some things they could not do. You say, but that's not fair. Is it fair that some children should be born blind? Do they get to do stuff wrong because they're blind and they were born that way? If God says don't do it. The Bible also says that you will never be tempted beyond the point that the Lord and the Holy Spirit will get you through without sinning. You may have to work a little bit at it. You may have to say, okay, so I don't have to watch my neighbor's wife mowing the lawn in her bikini. You might have to say, okay, so I'm not going to get up in the middle of the night and turn the internet on. You may have to work at it. Don't expect God to do what you can do for yourself. But the promise is there. You will not be tempted to sin. If you sin, it will be your doing. Yes, you have a sinful nature. So do I. So does everybody that was born. But we don't have to sin. God would not tell us not to do something that was impossible for us to not do. We have to cooperate with him. What is the answer to a man whose wife dies? What is the answer to a man whose wife is sick and he's heterosexual and wants to be with a woman? The answer is celibacy. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't act on his temptation. And if he's a Christian and wants to be a Christian, he prays and he says, Lord, I need help. I'm tempted. And the Lord promises now. The Lord doesn't say how many times you're going to do what you want to do before he also says, okay, I give up on you. If you're tempted and you give in when you could have asked for his help, And then the next day you're tempted and you give in until now is it not only easy to sin, but it's a whole lot of fun and it's just like falling off a log, no problem at all. Then it becomes a little harder for you to fight it. You can't give in and do what you want to do. And then at the end of a year say, well, it's worse now than it used to be. Of course it is. The more you do something and the more you get away with it, the more you're going to do it. I'm looking over some of my notes here to see what are some of the things that I want to say next. I want to emphasize again the definition of homosexual is a person who has a preference of being with the same sex or the same gender. A preference. It's like having a temptation. It's not a sin. It's not a sin until you do something that God says don't do. You have a choice. The choice is celibacy. The Catholic Church and me are not the only ones who are saying this. Many other Christian organizations are saying the same thing. In addition, and there will be other messages and other videos, there are people who are not homosexuals who think they are. Let me just give you one example, and I'll move on. I taught 6th grade for 8 years. Students are 11 when they go into the 6th grade. They're 12 when they leave the 6th grade. At that age, it's not unusual for occasionally a girl to fall in love with her teacher. That's all it is affection. No wild-eyed dreams at 11 years old, just love my teacher. Doesn't last very long. Nothing happens. But when they are older, and there is among certain homosexual organizations not only the desire to make it easier for them and make people approve of them more, but some of them even recruit, and some of them want straight people to believe they're gay, and that enlarges their groups and their organizations. I told you about a young woman who came on my program a few years ago when I was on Stickum and thought she was bisexual. I knew immediately she was not. Her father was a United Pentecostal Church preacher. I knew that at some point in her life, maybe she had an attraction for her teacher when she was in the 6th grade. Maybe she read a book and thought it was exciting. And Satan, who would love to see you go to hell and join him, puts it in her mind, you're bisexual. When she said bisexual, that told me that she liked boys, which is natural for a young girl. But I knew immediately that she had no interest in women. But some little thought that she had at some time in her life that because she was an honest, sincere person, thought, oh, I guess I like women too. There are many people who have misunderstood love for sexual attraction. This is one of the reasons I wanted to bring these guys out. They are very much in love. And one happens to be a male and one of them happens to be a female. It has nothing to do with it. They are friends. The little one shared a cage about 18 or 19 years ago with a cockatiel, a white cockatiel. And on Sundays, when we would have services in a convalescent hospital, it had 450 patients. We had 2 services a day there. And I'd take them, put them in the same cage. We would go somewhere to eat. And because it was too hot to have the birds in the car, I'd leave them in a store. I'd leave them in a pet store near the restaurant. Oh, he's going to kill her, the cat. No, they're fine. After that, when we moved up here 17 years ago, he was sharing a cage right up here in the living room with a myna bird, the black ones with that looked like crows. About 10 years ago, we had a fire, and I had another blue-fronted Amazon like this one. And with the birds and animals can feel the emotional tension of what's going on, and I was getting them into their emergency cages to get them in the car and get us off the mountain, which was burning up. And this little guy got out of his cage. She took the dish where you put the food and the water out, snuck out that door, opened that same dish in the other one's cage and got in. Just didn't want to be alone in this time, which was creating a lot of emotional tension in the room. And spent the 3 weeks of that fire in a cage with another bird just like this one. That bird was given away to my cardiologist to put my pacemaker in. And then later I got this one. These two were in nearby cages, and they wanted to be together so bad that whosever cage I opened first to clean and put food in it would immediately get out and try to break in the other one's cage. And I thought, if you guys want to be in the same cage, why am I cleaning 2 cages? They love each other. They love each other like David and Jonathan loved each other. You say, you admit David and Jonathan loved each other? Absolutely. They were best friends. They made a pact among themselves. When I grow up and have children, if anything happens to me, you're going to look after my family. And when you grow up and have a family, if anything happens to you, I'm going to look after your family. David lived in King Saul's palace because King Saul used to have some kind of fits. And David needed to be around to play the harp for him to calm him down. And of course Jonathan lived there because he was his son. And they became close friends. They loved each other like brothers. You do know, of course, that brothers can love each other without wanting to have sex with each other, right? You know that fathers love their daughters without wanting to have sex with them. You know that being in love or loving somebody does not necessarily mean you want to have sex with them. Now, on the marriage level, it does. But there are many kinds of love. Agape love is God's love for us, our love for Him, our love for our brothers and sisters in Christ. And none of that has anything to do with sex. Filial love is loving somebody in your own family, like a friend. It's not wanting to have sex with them. Then there is erotic love, which, yes, is love between a man and a woman, and yes, it will and does result in sex. But not all love, in fact, very little real love, has anything to do with sex. These birds love each other. They want to be in the same cage. She doesn't lay eggs. Now, if I let Captain and Kiki together like these two are, Kiki's laying eggs, she's making a nest, because they're a couple. These two are not. Love does not equate into a sexual relationship, not even a desire for a sexual relationship. And with not everybody who is gay, but those who are politically pushing gayness, I believe their intention at the beginning was to feel that they should have some rights they weren't getting, and so forth. I believe they probably had pretty good intentions. But the gay pride movement has gotten very aggressive and done some things which are not even logical. And one of the things that they are doing is trying to say, well, how can anybody be against love? Nobody is against love. They have tried to make David and Jonathan out to be homosexuals. Nobody questions they were in love. There is not one thing, I mentioned it, I think, last Sunday, briefly, the story of David and Jonathan. Every activity they did together, there is not one thing that suggests sex. Another person in the Bible that some of the gay pride movement want to make into something it isn't was between Ruth and her mother-in-law. The mother and her husband and her two sons go into a foreign country, Moab. The husband dies, the two sons die. The wife is alive and the two daughters-in-law. They're in a foreign country. There is no longer a famine in Israel, so mother-in-law, is going to go back to her country. One of the daughters wants to go with her. They love each other. Like you would love a sister. Like you would love a best friend. Doesn't mean they wanted to have sex. What is a homosexual? A person with a preference to be with somebody of the same gender. Naomi even schooled and educated Ruth into the religious Israeli laws that would make it possible for her to have a relationship with her dead husband's nearest kin and thereby have a son. And Naomi even took on the role of an older woman instructing a younger woman in how to get a young man interested in her. You've got to be, where's sex between these two women? Did they love each other? Of course they did. Are there men I love? Of course. Do I want to sleep with them? No way. There are children that I love. There are women that I love. Love does not always equate to sex. And that's what we can't get out of the minds of these people. They want to make certain Bible characters gay to make it okay to be gay. And there is nothing gay in these people's lives. Love, yes. Thank God for love. Love is a great thing. But a desire to be with them sexually, it just isn't there. There's an organization, they speak about the King James Bible and the Queen James Bible. And they say that we have mistranslated the Bible to be against gays. But it's funny, we haven't mistranslated the Bible to say anything else wrong. We have only mistranslated the Bible to say that gays should not be sleeping together. I'm going to talk about this political organization of gay pride. I'm not talking about individuals. Y'all know I have friends that are gay. I have relatives that are gay. I have people that I care for that are gay. Some of them practice a gay lifestyle, some do not. Some I have no clue because I haven't discussed their sex life with them. But I'm talking about this organization. I believe maybe in the beginning they may have had good intentions. I don't think I would agree with them, but I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. But they're not giving me the benefit of the doubt. Come on. Fair's fair. For example, in order to make gays feel comfortable with their gayness, they will organize something like a gay pride parade. So that, and sometimes they do outrageous things. Like what? Like sit on each other's laps and kiss each other and hug each other while they're going down a float in a parade. You say that's outrageous. Married couples don't do that. You see the president and his wife in a parade. You don't see her sitting in his lap with their arms around kissing, and they're married. They could very well do it. But it's not something you do. So why would they want to, other than just to prove that they could? What would happen if I organized a parade? You think I could get a license to have a parade, let's say in favor of, we've decided to wait till we're married. And I had lovely girls and great looking young men on a float, beautifully dressed. And the whole message is, we've decided to do what the Bible says. We're going to get married. And when we get married, we will behave like married people. But in the meantime, we'll wait. Now, how come I can't do a parade like that? Because it's not politically correct. It's politically correct to let the gays do their thing, but it's not politically correct for us to do ours. Well, let's see. Am I right? I think that the Mormons in Utah and the Catholics in Massachusetts, you know, it's the property taxes that you pay on the houses you buy that keep your schools in business. Wouldn't you think that the decision what to teach in school should be up to the people whose kids go to that school and the people whose taxes pay for the school? But it didn't work that way. Somebody that lives at 1600 Pennsylvania in Washington, D.C. decides with your kids on the mountain I live on the Mormons that live in Utah, on the Catholics that live somebody else, what's going to be taught in their school, and what is taught. When it came out, now remember, I taught public school in the 60s and in the 70s. I went to school in the 30s and the 40s, and those were nothing like it is now in the teens. They decided they would teach sex education in school. Well, I thought it was a waste of time. One of the dogs is doing something. I'll be right back. I hate to interrupt this tape, but I think that this is the only way that I can solve this very quickly here. Are you guys behaving yourself? Oh, you're up on top again? And the little birds, the gray birds, are down here on the bottom. And I took them out of the way so they couldn't get up there when the big birds got here. Oh my goodness. Okay, thanks for waiting. Sorry about that. Sometimes I don't know whether to let the dogs out here where I can control them or leave them off someplace where they won't be so much aware of what's going on. All right. I was not in favor of sex education being taught. I think it's for parents to decide what their kids should be taught, not somebody who lives halfway across the country. But the gay pride people were going to get a certain advantage, as well as more modernists were going to get a certain advantage by certain things being taught in sex education. What is that? What did the gays get out of it? Well, the gay lifestyle, other children were desensitized to the gay lifestyle. In other words, in these classes, they said, well, there's all kinds of families. There are families that have two dads. There are families that have two moms. There are families that have two moms and one dad. There are families of adopted children. We have all kinds of families in our country, and we love them all. So the gay pride movement got a little desensitizing. Children from very religious homes were taught, I guess it's okay. In school, they say there are many ways to have families, and so that helped the gays a little bit. Did I get equal treatment? Did the same teacher that said, it's okay, did that same teacher give my kids a boost by saying, well, if it's against your religion and you're having a problem with it, we can give you the phone numbers of 3 pastors who will be happy to counsel and pray with you. Or you can't do that, no. But you give my kids, no, not my children, but our children, you give them an address where they can get a condom. You make an appointment where they can go and get an abortion. You can't do the same for me. The people on the opposite side of the fence, they can't go get spiritual help if they feel they need it. They can get a condom. But if they want counseling, they can't get that. Did passing out condoms give us any less pregnant school kids? No. We have even more kids getting pregnant in school than we ever did. Passing out condoms didn't help. Does getting into a parent's home and a parent's business and yanking a living being from their daughters' stomachs, they have the right to do that? This business of sex education in the school was one-sided. It didn't help Christians and their way of life. It helped those who were not. It didn't help us, just like we don't get we've decided to wait until marriage parade. Let me check here. I'm going to turn hi Merman. I was just going to say, if you give me just a moment, those that are watching the video, I'm going to turn, I have the friend chat turned off, and I want to turn it on, giving everybody present in our live session the opportunity to ask questions. We have a member suggesting that maybe they should make condoms more effective. The point I'm making, and Merman wasn't here from the beginning, which is okay. The point of this particular video was not the effectiveness of a particular program. That was only a part of what I was saying. But it was the fact that there are political groups that get some of what they want taught in the schools, and the religious groups don't. When I went to school, and you know, anything, whether it's a condom or anything, it's only as good as you use it. The point I was making is that all this education, which hurt some, really didn't help anybody. It didn't help anybody, and yet it hurt some. And I think it was out of line to teach in the schools something that the parents whose kids go there and those who own the property, the taxes upon which pay for the schools, have nothing to say about it. If our guests or any of the rest of you want to ask a question or make a comment, please feel free to do that now. One of the other things that I have mentioned in some of the other videos, and I will be mentioning in future videos, there are some who believe themselves to be gay, who don't wish to be gay, and who are sometimes, not always, helped by counseling. I'll talk about that, and you all know that I'm not in favor of reinventing the wheel. if I find, and I think I have found one Catholic and one Protestant organization, if I find it an organization that I feel is doing a very good job, I will let you know how to get in touch with them. And when I said they could be bi, I think you got in a little late. We talked about that. We talked about a girl who believed she was. And there are 2 videos out that you might want to view. And that was one of the reasons that I made them, was because in a live program, even on a video like the one we're making now for YouTube, it's possible to log in and log out and get only part of what was said. But at least the videos on YouTube are still there, and you can go back and get them. On a live program, once somebody comes in, they have missed what was said before. And once they go out, they miss anything that's said after that. And that kind of handicaps them as far as knowing everything that was said. Yeah, there are people, very few people who are bi. Actually, there are none. There are those who years ago were told, oh, you'll outgrow it. Get married. You'll get used to it. And that's not the case. I know a very fine man. I thought he had a very good marriage. I didn't see him for a while because I had cancer and didn't see any of my friends for a few years. And later learned that his wife left him for a homosexual marriage. And he, of course, now is remarried too, and very happily married. Years ago, many gays tried to hide the fact that they were gay and got married. There is an example. See, you missed out what we were talking about being born that way. Jesus would have no problem with them. Okay, and then 07 is telling me about tomboys. Tomboys is has to do with gender-related activities that are not sexual. I think between the time I was about 6 and 8, or maybe 5 and 8, I was a tomboy. I climbed trees. My mother thought I was going to die every day falling out of a tree. To be a tomboy is for a girl to do activities that are thought of as being men's activities. Or the opposite would be a guy playing with dolls. A male child doing something that people think should be an activity for a little girl instead of a boy's activity. But see, these are not sexually related. These are activities. Climbing a tree, playing with dolls, is not having sex. And that's a small part of what we're trying to teach in these videos. It's not all about sex. Love is not, there's all kinds of love. All love doesn't require a sexual expression. Love among friends, love among your parents, love for God. These are examples of real love, but not only erotic love, not filial love, not agape love has a sexual component. So I hope I made that clear. But tomboys is doing a girl doing boy things, but has nothing to do with sex. And it is also something you outgrow. One of the things that I mentioned in the first video, there are people who do engage in sex, in homosexual activities, and they're not even homosexuals. You know about men in prison, right? It's called gay for the stay. They want the sexual activity. There's no love. They want the excitement and the rest of what a sexual experience produces, but there's no love. And I'm sorry, but among many gays, there's no love. How much love is there in a bathhouse where you meet somebody and you're with them for 10 minutes and you never see them again in the rest of your life? That's sex. That's not love. And this portion of it, because in our Bible study we're in the first chapter of Romans, and it talks about men lying with men the way men lie with women. That's specifically what we're talking about. Lesbian like, that's right. They like, and a lesbian